So I already rated all 53 silver augments, and thankfully there aren't 53 gold augments. Instead, there are 59. So let's get right into it. And because there are 59 different augments, I admittedly have not been able to try each and every single one of them, so some of them I will not be as confident on, but we'll still try our best. The first augment we have is All For You, where your heals and shields on allied champions are increased in effectiveness by 40%. Now this is pretty similar to the silver augment, which just increases all of your heals and shields by 25%, and a 15% increase is okay, but nothing too special. Normally if you are playing like an enchanter or a healer, you are using your heals and shields mostly on your ally, but it does kind of suck that when you do need to save yourself, if they're trying to focus you down, then this augment doesn't do too much for you. I'll still place this augment in the good tier. If you are playing an enchanter, it's definitely going to be one of the better augments for you, but in general, enchanters just don't have the best augments in Arena at the moment. The next augment we have is Angel of Retribution, which is a quest augment, where when you heal allied champions for 2,500 in total, or mitigate 2,500 damage, which pretty much will be shields, then you get this reward, where you gain 100% bonus attack speed and empower your basic attacks to deal bonus magic damage equal to 300% of your heal and shield power. Now I've only seen this taken once when my friend was playing Karma, and honestly it didn't look like it was anything too special. Now this is supposed to be another enchanter rune as you have to heal allied champions. Maybe there's some gimmick where you could play like a Warwick or like a Udyr or like a Master Yi where you go Moonstone Renewer, and then perhaps you could somehow cheese the heal and then get this 100% bonus attack speed, because on those champions it would be quite good. I think the purpose of this augment is for you to then eventually build Sword of the Blossoming Dawn, which gives you more attack speed based on your heal and shield power as well as damage, but at the same time it's just not that much damage, where I don't think this augment is really that strong. Right now in the game, what's really meta is super duper tanky people, as well as champions that are able to take down those tanks thanks to the on-hit items. And I think an enchanter with those on-hit items just doesn't perform as well as the standard ADCs who love having on-hit. Now, the reason why I'm putting it in the not fully tested tier is because maybe I'm wrong, maybe this is better than I actually think, but the way Arena works right now with having all these 59 augments, it's kind of hard for me to test each and every single one of them, so definitely let me know in the comments below if it is better than I actually think. The next augment we have is Apex Inventor, which grants you 300 item haste, which is equivalent to 75% cooldown reduction. And this augment is actually absolutely game breaking, especially if you can get it early on, as then you'll be able to focus on building items that would benefit greatly from this item haste. There's so many interactions which are so good with Apex Inventor. One of them is like Luden's Tempest, where you can get a bunch of procs. You could proc a bunch of times like Sheen items with this. There's a bunch of actives in the game like Zhonya's, which are really good with Apex Inventor, as you can just constantly be procking it so that you can get that more frames of invincibility, and it also works on those passive effects. But what I like Apex Inventor for the best is actually Heartsteel, which is why I like seeing this augment first, because Heartsteel's cooldown is actually affected by Apex Inventor, which just makes that combo absolutely ridiculous, because you'll be getting way more Heartsteel procs off in Arena, which is just really ridiculous. And if you see somebody who has Apex Inventor as well as Heartsteel, you can see just how quickly that item will be stacking, and that alone I think is enough to make this a game-breaking item. Now we have Banner of Command, which is returning, which replaces your Flea with this summoner that's called Banner of Command, which grants your ally 25 bonus health, attack damage, ability power, and attack speed for 10 seconds. Honestly, this is another one that's pretty good to take on like enchanters or tanks, but it's nothing too crazy, especially with how I view Arena right now, where you want both members to be pretty important. It kind of sucks that one person is just going to be kind of down in Augment. Sure, you're like super buffing one person, but in a lot of instances, that isn't too incredible. Also, if you watch my silver augment tier list, you know how much I value Flea, and having to lose that doesn't feel good, especially on a gold augment. Now we have Big Brain, where at the start of each round, you gain a shield that absorbs damage equal to 300% AP, and I think this one is actually kind of OP, definitely not game-breaking, because a shield doesn't help you deal damage, except for the fact that it can help you survive like one-shots or just damage in general, so that you can pump out your damage. This is definitely really good on someone like Veigar, who can easily stack a ton of AP, because if you have 1,000 AP, you will get a 3,000 shield, which is pretty strong. This augment is definitely better in the later stages of the game, and definitely better if you can get an augment that gives you more AP, especially stacking AP, because then you will be having so much that the shield will be starting to get really ridiculous. In the early game, if you have like 200 AP, then you'll have like a 600 shield, which isn't bad, but it can be whittled down pretty quickly, and then you're kind of down an augment in that fight. Let me actually quickly get 2 augments out of the way that I've never seen, which are Backstab and Itemizer. What Backstab supposedly does is that you deal 30% increased damage, as well as benefit from 30% Omnivamp against enemies while hitting them from behind, similarly kind of to like a Shaco passive. I'm going to put this one in the useless tier because here you can see that it says NA not available, so maybe they actually got rid of this augment. I haven't really seen anyone talk about it, or I've never seen it in any of my games, so maybe this one ended up getting deleted and just is shown on the wiki still. Then the other augment is Itemizer, where at the start of each shopping phase, the first item you sell has its resale value increased to 100%, and additionally increases stats of all your items by 5%. Kind of an interesting augment where you can constantly pivot your builds a little bit by selling like an item, like for instance a GA you could buy, and then once it gets popped you can sell it and buy a different item, but at the same time it did sound kind of weak, so I'm going to put in the useless tier, not because I actually think it's useless, but again I don't know if you can actually take it, as I still have never ever seen it. Speaking of augments that I've never ever seen, we have Blood Brother, which apparently still exists in the game, which gives you Darius passive. And pretty much what Darius's passive is that every time you attack somebody, you cause them to bleed. It looks like you can only stack it with your basic attacks, while Darius could also stack it with his Q. And then you get that bleed effect, and then has this very interesting thing where if Draven applies 5 stacks of hemorrhage to an enemy champion, he becomes empowered with Noxian Might for 5 seconds, giving him some bonus attack damage, which is quite good. But at the same time, you do have to hit somebody 5 times, which does take quite a lot. The damage on it seems to be okay. It does scale with your bonus AD, so you want to be building a lot of AD if you want to do damage with this. I don't really know how to rate this, as I have never taken it, never seen it. Don't actually know if it actually does exist. If you have played it, please let me know in the comments below, because it does sound kind of interesting, but not that incredible just to gain somebody's passive, especially because you don't utilize the passive as well as Darius would, as he gets some other benefits from it, like his ultimate doing more damage. So for now, I'm also going to put it in the not fully tested tier, and in the parentheses seems kind of bad, because I think if it was really, really good, then I would be seeing it more often in my games, and I just think other gold augments are better. Now we have 3 new augments that are all pretty similar in bread and butter, bread and cheese, and bread and jam, which all sounds absolutely delicious. And pretty much what these augments do is that each specific one gives one of your basic abilities increased ability haste, and I think these are all relatively OP. Getting 150 ability haste on an ability you really want to spam is quite powerful. Now, you might want me to more specifically rate each of the different ones, like Q, E, W. I think that Q is probably going to be the best one, so I'll put it first. And then honestly, W and E is kind of 50-50. I'm going to put W just a little bit higher, because oftentimes those are like your cheesy like shield spells or like CC spells, while your E are your more like unique spells, but definitely all 3 of them are going to just depend on what champion you are playing. For personal experience, I really liked having lower W cooldown when I was playing Nautilus, because then I just constantly had this really fat shield up, which really helped me carry in the early game, which just felt really good. Honestly, these augments could also really easily be game breaking or absolutely useless, like if you're playing a champion that just doesn't care about one of their abilities that much and having it more often up would not be that good, then it won't feel that impressive. But if you really do want a lot of CDR on that ability, then of course these augments are ridiculous. Now our old pal Cannon Fodder is returning, and what it does is you automatically enter a catapult at the start of each combat round. And last time this augment was available, I rated it as the worst gold augment. And honestly, I'm definitely going to put it in the lowest tier in useless. I actually don't think I've ever taken this augment, which is pretty crazy to think about, because last time Arena was out, I played every single champion, which is like over 160 games guaranteed. And I've definitely played certain champions more than once, so I've definitely played like easily over 200 games. And I've never taken Cannon Fodder. And honestly, in all my games, I've probably seen like 3 people take Cannon Fodder, so they do like it, as they have kept it in the game, but I just really haven't seen anybody utilize it. Kind of similarly to Big Brain, it's like really good at the beginning of the fight, because that's the only time you can really use it, as you automatically enter the catapult. But Big Brain gives you a big shield, while Catapult just sends you into the enemy team, which they can see, and they can just like flash away or run away from it. and it doesn't really do anything else besides that. You'd rather just have an augment that actually does something better than that. Now we have Celestial Body returning, but it actually got buffed. It used to be that you gained 1000 bonus health, but now you gain 1250 bonus health, but you reduce your damage output by 10% still, and I think this augment is very strong. Now I'm going to put this at the top of OP tier for now, and the only reason why these two are higher than these is because oftentimes you'll get the cooldown for the ability you just absolutely don't care about, as Riot Games likes to troll you, but honestly these three are quite strong if you do get the ability that you do care about with a lower cooldown. Anyways, back to Celestial Body. If you think about it, at the beginning of the game, you have like around like 1200 health already, like 1500 max, and this is pretty much just doubling your total health, which is pretty ridiculous. Reducing your damage output by 10% doesn't really do that much, especially if you're playing like a tank or enchanter, because your main objective usually is just to CC the enemy or help your teammate survive. But the strongest thing about Celestial Body is how well it synergizes with items like Radiant Virtue, or more importantly, that Heartsteel item again, because Heartsteel, the way it works is that the damage scales with your maximum health, so if you have Celestial Body, you just have more health in general, and then the damage you do will convert into permanent health, and so if you have Celestial Body early on, and then you get the Heartsteel, you'll be just stacking more health than anybody else who has that Heartsteel item, which can lead to absolutely ridiculous late games in terms of how much health you have. Now we have the first of our Keystone Rune augments, and in my original video I absolutely trashed these augments, and what they've done is try to buff them. It's kind of hard to see how they've buffed them, but I've seen people take them and I've hovered over the stats and they still look absolutely terrible. They're definitely not useless. You can definitely use Electrocute and Phase Rush, but they also have like decently long cooldowns and they just don't do as much as many of the other augments. I mean, think about it in a normal game of League. Would you rather have Electrocute and Phase Rush, or rather have like Veigar E always be off cooldown, or like Veigar Q always being off cooldown, or just like any champion, something like that? I think also because it's a gold augment, it just doesn't really stand up to many of the other ones. I mean, every time you hover over the stats, they just aren't that impressive. If it was a silver augment, then maybe sometimes you could consider taking them, but even then, I'm not too excited about having Electrocute and Phase Rush in the arena game mode. Then we have another new augment, which I have not taken yet, which is Critical Healing, where your heals and shields now have a chance equal to 100% critical strike chance to increase its effectiveness by 50%, and additionally you gain 20% critical strike chance. The only time I've ever seen this taken was when a Briar randomly took it, and I'm pretty sure they went last place without getting many kills. I think the problem with this is that there aren't too many champions that have like a bunch of healing as well as wanting to build critical strike chance. I think maybe the best champions with this would be like Dr. Mundo, who has that heal with his passive and with his ultimate, and he could build something like Atma's, which gives him critical strike chance based on his total health, and in that case maybe this augment is really good. But besides that, there aren't too many champions I can think of that would want critical healing. You wouldn't really want to build it on enchanters because you don't really want to build crit. And if you think about it, it only has a chance to increase in effectiveness by 50%, while an augment like All For You will just increase your healing and shielding on your ally by 40% every single time. And there's that silver augment that just increases the effectiveness of your heals and shields by 25%. So I'm going to put critical healing in not fully tested, but seems bad, because I mean, it just doesn't really seem to fit the mold of many champions, and I don't think it's that good. But again, I could be wrong as I haven't tested it too much. Now we have Dark Blessing, which is one of these like curse augments where you gain this stacking curse and then you get a permanent bonus from it. This one reports that you gain bonus health and bonus damage, but I'm pretty sure it actually just gives you like CDR. I'm not 100% sure on that. I've taken this one time on Taric, and then at the end of the game I had like 500 CDR, which is pretty ridiculous, but we still ended up going second just because how many nerfs Taric has received. Now I think this augment is really good for enchanters, especially if you get it really early on, as you can just stack a bunch of CDR and then constantly spam these heals and shields for your team. I'm going to put this in the strong but niche tier because it is nice having a bunch of CDR, but at the same time, if they are able to get over your heals and shields, or they just build like anti-heal or like the anti-shield item, then it doesn't feel as good to have all of that CDR. There also might be some that give you like MR and armor, and I think those are the best ones with Dark Blessing. Maybe there's some that give you like adaptive force. It's kind of hard to tell with all these as the wiki sometimes gets things wrong, but I think I will say though, all of them do feel pretty good. I think the health ones are some of the weaker ones. All the other stats seem to be better, but still is acceptable. Now we have Dawnbringer's Resolve, where upon dropping below 50% maximum health, you heal for 30% maximum health over 3 seconds. Now this augment was definitely better, I think, previously when fights were a lot faster in Arena, as the meta was more about like one-shotting people, but now where the meta is more about like having a tank and a carry and just trying to have like long fights where you can hopefully revive your teammate or something similar to that, then Dawnbringer's Resolve doesn't feel that amazing. It's kind of a weird augment because like, who do you really want to take it on? Because tanks, like healing 30% of your maximum health over 3 seconds is nice, but at the same time, you'd rather oftentimes just have other augments that can heal you for like longer or more consistently. And also, I don't like how this augment can just be really cut down so easily with like healing cut, and it also only procs one time while other augments will constantly give you benefits. Dawnbringer's Resolve is definitely good, but it's going to be at the bottom of the good tier. It's just decent, but I'm never too excited to have to take it. Now we have Deathtouch, which pretty much is Dark Blessing, except this one procs on all of your basic attacks, which I think is just a lot better in general. I'm once again going to put it in the strong but niche tier, especially if you're just gaining bonus health, because again, I don't think that it's that strong. If you can gain like permanent AD and AP, then I actually think Deathtouch is really, really strong, but I'm not actually that sure anymore. I think I've only seen this one with the bonus health and the bonus true damage. Now, some of you in the comments might be raging that I haven't talked about the kind of buggy interaction, or at least exploit in my eyes, where if you and your teammate both have curse augments, then they stack together and it just becomes absolutely ridiculous. That's how I was able to play this Jhin game where I had, I think 22,000 max health at the end of the game, because me and the Udyr both had stacking health prismatics. In that case, the curse augments are really, 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 really OP. But in every other case, the curse augments are not too crazy, although they can have really high highs if you're able to constantly proc them. So honestly, for the curse augments in general, they're kind of OP but niche, because it does rely on you being able to stack it consistently. So it'll really depend on a bunch of outside factors like enemy teams, as well as like what your team is consisting of. So they are interesting ideas and they have really high highs, but also these augments, if you don't reach those high highs, they could just lead to you getting eliminated early, as they might not be able to stack fast enough before you are eliminated. I'm genuinely curious though if the curse double stacking is an intended feature or if it is a bug. I guess we'll have to see in the next patch, as I don't believe it has been hotfixed yet. But as long as it is in the game, you could exploit it and just kind of insta-win the game. But if it isn't fixed at the moment, you could definitely exploit it, have a little bit of fun, but just remember that it does kind of ruin the fun for everybody else, as I did feel kind of bad that they didn't have a chance to fight back against us. So I've only done it in one game, but it was really fun in that one game, I'll be honest. So it is one of those weird conflicting things where like exploit fun for the people doing it, but not fun for the people who have to play against it, so just something to consider. It's kind of similar to like the people who are playing Yuumi plus tanks right now, where they're just trying to survive the zone, just being AFK, avoiding damage for as long as possible. It's like, okay, sure, you are winning the game. I guess you might be having fun, but nobody else is having fun. And honestly, if that's your definition of fun, that's pretty sad, as you are just kind of watching the screen and hoping that nothing happens in the game. Like, if your best case scenario is that the enemies are AFK and don't interact with you, then what's the point of really playing the game? In that case, like, why not just play solitaire, as you won't have to worry about anybody trying to interact with you. You can just... Wait, sorry, no, solitaire is actually a bad example, because that has more interactions and more gameplay than what the Yuumi plus tank players are doing at the moment. Let's get back on track with the augments, going over defensive maneuvers, which once again replaces flee, but gives you both barrier and heal. Now my problem with this augment is that it is alright, but the numbers on it just aren't that great. If you're going to give up your flee, you have to get something really good in return, and just barrier and heal maybe kind of helping you survive like 1 or 2 auto attacks isn't that incredible, because with these numbers you aren't really surviving too much or anything that impressive. Sure, it's nice that it casts both on you yourself and your ally, but it just isn't that good compared to a lot of the other things you could take. so I'm gonna have to put it in the almost useless tier. It definitely has some use cases, but if you are taking defensive maneuvers, I don't think anybody's ever been like, yes, let's go, we've won this fight for sure. Then we have our next Keystone Augment in Demon's Dance, which gives you Fleet and Grasp of the Undying. I guess if you get this one first, it's kind of okay because you can get some grasp stacks. But again, if you ever hover over this in a game, you can see just how pathetic the numbers on this augment are. I'll be definitely putting it above Combo Master because I just think Phase Rush and Electrocute are a lot worse. But honestly, all of the Keystone ones, spoiler, I'm not going to be that excited about, as again, there are other options you can take, and even if this was a silver augment, I don't think that many people would be taking it. Now we have Die Another Day, another augment that replaces your Flee, but this time with Kindred Ult, and Kindred Ult is pretty good. It's a lot better than Barrier and Heal, I can tell you that for sure. This one I'm going to be putting in the strong but niche tier. If you're fighting against somebody who's trying to dive you and just one-shot you really quickly with big explosive abilities, then Die Another Day is quite strong, as having the Kindred Ult to counter that is pretty amazing. I believe you can also, like, when you're trying to revive your teammate, sit in the Die Another Day effect and be able to revive them more easily. So that is actually quite strong in the current meta. That being said, you can also accidentally save the enemies if you misplay with Die Another Day. You can forget that you have it all together, because trust me, that's going to happen. You're not really going to think that your Ghost or Flash or Ignite, what you normally have on D, is actually all of a sudden going to be a Kindred Ult. So you have such something else that you have to consider while you're playing. But if you're able to get some good Kindred Ults off, then this augment can definitely be really strong. Then we have one of my absolute favorite augments in Dive Bomber, where your team's first death each round creates an explosion at the location, dealing true damage equal to 20% of the target's maximum health, which will means the person who dies health, to enemies within 500 units. And even though it's one of my favorite augments, this augment is pretty trash, honestly. I'm going to barely put it above defensive maneuvers, but honestly, I think defensive maneuvers might even be better. The dream of Dive Bomber is to have this like Omega tank run into the enemy team and die and then deal a bunch of damage, but any strategy that revolves around one of you dying isn't that good. And usually what's going to happen is that your carry is actually going to be the one who's dying, and probably from long range, and then they won't even do any damage to anybody because they won't be in that 500 units. And even if they do that damage, 20% of their health isn't that impressive. I've seen tanks like explode near a bunch of people, and honestly, the damage isn't even that crazy. Like, it's kind of just sad. Normally what happens is somebody with Bork just absolutely shreds you, and then sure, they take some damage, but then they just heal it all the way back because they have a bunch of lifesteal. So Dive Bomber, oh, dude, I almost want to put it in useless tier now, but because I enjoy the rune, no, I really have to put it in useless. It's so bad. I've never taken this rune and actually seen it pop off, even though I've taken this rune way too... So I keep saying rune. Even though I've taken this augment way too many times, it truly is useless. Like, just the dream of like blowing up and just absolutely one-shotting two people with it is never going to happen. I mean, 500 units is just nothing. It's like, sure, it is instant, but oh man, it just feels really bad. Dive Bomber, it really is useless. I actually have to put it above Combo Master. The pain, the pain. Speaking of almost useless, we have Ethereal Weapon, which is one of the most confusing augments for me, where your abilities apply on-hit effects at 100% effectiveness. Now, funnily enough, I wanted to see where I put Ethereal Weapon last time, and let me just see what I said. So even back then, I was confused by it, and I'm still confused by it now. I think I've ended up putting it in the OP or kind of useless tier, mostly kind of as a cop-out answer because I hadn't tried it out that much. In that video, I talked about how I took it on a Cassiopeia and tried to build like on hit so that my E could hopefully then like absolutely mow people down, but it didn't feel really that strong. I tried to talk about like Kaisa Q maybe proccing a bunch of on hits, but again, didn't feel like that crazy. Hopefully somebody can finally enlighten me when you would be taking Ethereal Weapon, when it would actually pop off, as usually what I just see is that the best thing to do to apply on hits is just auto attack them. So for all these reasons, I'm actually going to put Ethereal Weapon in the almost useless tier. I'm actually now remembering the best case scenarios for Ethereal Weapon, which are like Zyra, I think her plants can proc it, or champions like Heimerdinger can use it on his turrets a little bit. It could be maybe good on like a Garen E, as you could get a proc every second. But when champions have like 2.0 attack speed, that means they're auto attacking 2 times every second, which means they're getting more of these on-hit procs than you would be, even if you're like Garen E spinning on somebody. And then you're forced to have like this weird on-hit build with Garen, which just makes you really squishy, which I don't think would be that amazing. So very confusing augment. Maybe there are some really OP things you can do with it, but I personally have not really seen them in all the games I've played, except for that one Zyra build that did kind of okay with it. And I haven't been able to really test it on anything besides that one random Cassio game, and I don't really want to play Cassio with Bork ever again. Now we have Extendo-Arm, which automatically casts Blitzcrank's Rocket Grab at a nearby enemy champion, which is his Q. And honestly, this augment is game-breaking when the enemies have it, as it will always hit you, and will always hit you at the exact wrong time. But when you have it, it will just pull in the Omega tank and absolutely get you and your partner killed. So at the end of the day, I think I'm just going to put it in the good tier. It is really good when it works out. If you have somebody that you want to hit, like a Vayne or a Twitch that's just trying to like kite you, then it's really good. But usually what ends up happening is you just hit the frontliner that you don't really want in your face. Sure, that extra little bit of CC is kind of nice, but not amazing for a gold augment. If you do get hit by it, it feels really annoying, especially in the early game. If you're like trying to get a power flower, then you might not really think about the Blitzcrank hook, and it can actually like ruin your day when you're trying to heal up. It just adds another layer that the enemies have to think about though, which can be kind of nice, where they're going to be kind of paranoid trying to juke left and right. But if they do successfully juke the hook, then you're just down an augment for 12 seconds. And even if you do land that hook, it's usually going to be on that tank, which isn't that amazing. Now we have Firebrand, where your basic attacks apply a burn for 5 seconds that deals bonus magic damage per second equal to 0.6% of the target's maximum health over the duration, and this burn stacks infinitely and refreshes with each application. Now Firebrand, I think, has the same stats that the Silver Augment used to have, where you would have to CC people in order to get that burn, but it is applying on basic attacks. Now when I played that Omega tanky Jhin game, which was using the double curse method, we played against a Jax that had Firebrand, and he actually was able to beat us even though we had like 18,000 health, me and the Udyr, just because he was doing like 15,000 damage with Firebrand. So if you're playing against somebody who has a ton of health that you can't really kill, then Firebrand is amazing if you do have good attack speed. Against tanks, this is game breaking. It is very powerful. Against squishies, it doesn't really do anything. You don't really care about it. But thankfully, nobody in this game is really that squishy because everybody has bonus health. So I'm going to put Firebrand in the OP tier, but definitely at the top. Honestly, because tanks are so meta, I am going to put Firebrand in game breaking, just because I'm looking at the other augments I have there at the moment, and it just really is quite a strong augment to counter the current meta. Now we have the augment from beginning to end, which has the potential to do absolutely nothing. It gives you Dark Harvest and First Strike, which means that if somebody hits you, then you actually lose the First Strike. And if you never get somebody below 50% of their maximum health, then you never get to proc Dark Harvest. So this has the potential to do absolutely nothing each round. But if you are able to proc First Strike, you are able to get that 7% bonus true damage at your first instance of like damage, and you do get a little bit of gold. This augment is, again, almost useless. I think I'm going to put it right here, as I do think Grasp is better than this augment, but man, all of these are pretty bad, as the Keystones just don't do enough in Arena. Again, if you don't believe me, just look at the stats at the end of the game. Never has it ever been that impressive. And think about it, would you rather have a Silver Augment or Dark Harvest and First Strike? Oftentimes you would be taking a Silver Augment, as like one of them just gives you 60% attack speed, which is way better than this augment. Now we have Holy Fire, where your heals and shields cause you to fire a missile to the nearest enemy champion within 650 units over 0.32 seconds, applying a burn upon arrival that deals magic damage equal to 1% of the target's maximum health every second over 5 seconds. And this augment I have not actually seen yet, I believe, and so I'm going to put in the not fully tested. Seems kind of bad. I think this augment by itself isn't very good, as you aren't really spamming a lot of heals or shields. But if you have this augment with one of the augments that give you like stacking CDR, or like having a bunch of reduced CDR on one of your heals and shields, then this augment could end up doing a ton of damage. This augment could maybe be really good with like Master Yi if he's Wing. Maybe he could like burn a bunch of your health bar, as I'm not really sure exactly how it works. 650 units range isn't too bad, but it's also not that crazy, so that's another thing you have to think about, because if you're Master EWing, they could just walk up and try and cancel it. So it definitely needs to be tested more. Sadly, not something I've been able to do. Could be potentially really, really strong with certain like cheesy combos, but I don't think this augment is going to be very consistent for sure. Now, I thought this was going to be the last Keystone rune, so I was excited, but sadly I see that we have Keystone Conjurer coming up. But let's first talk about Impassable, where you gain Aftershock and Glacial Augment, which is alright, but I'm hovering over Aftershock right now and it says it has a 20-second cooldown. Hopefully that is buffed in Arena, but having an augment only like every 20 seconds, which gives you just some bonus magic resist and armor for 2.5 seconds, isn't that incredible. Also, Glacial Augment is okay. This one says it has a 25-second CDR, which just isn't that impactful for such a long cooldown. At this point, I'm kind of a broken record talking about the Keystone runes. I'm probably going to put this one right below Grasp. Actually, I'll put this one at the highest just because I think it can be the most impactful. As it is pretty easy to proc in that one instance, and in that one instance, it can actually be fairly decent. But after that instance expires, as Aftershock and Glacial Augment are not permanent, then you are just down a gold augment compared to everybody else until the CDR comes back online, and I just don't think it is that fast. Now, this one I could be wrong. Maybe the CDR is super duper low, and in that case, constantly getting Aftershock would be pretty incredible, but I just don't think that is true. I do think it is rather weak. Now we have the most simple gold augment in its critical, where you just gain 40% critical strike chance. When I first made this tier list, I really liked this augment, as gaining that 40% critical strike chance felt pretty good in the early stages of the game, or even the late stages of the game, as critical strike chances scaled pretty well. But just gaining 40% critical strike chance doesn't really wow me as much anymore, because there's better augments out there. It's going to go at the top of the good category. I don't mind taking this if I am forced to, if I don't want to use like a reroll, for instance. But it's definitely not going to lead to the high highs that some of the other augments can. Now we have a new augment that really confuses me, even though I've taken it several times and I've seen other people take it several times, which is its killing time. And what this does is that upon casting your ultimate ability, you apply Zed's Death Mark to all enemy champions, and the mark stores 30% of all pre-mitigation damage dealt to the effective target, which detonates after 5 seconds to deal physical damage equal to the damage stored against them, which pretty much is just, yeah, like Zed ult. But the thing with Zed ult is that he jumps right on top of you, and then he has all of his shadows to then quickly pump out all of his damage, and then he can get out. But if you are just casting this without having all of those Zed mechanics, then it doesn't feel as good. Because the way it works right now is that once you use your ultimate, the enemies can know that they just need to like run away or try to survive. Or oftentimes, if you are using your ultimate, you're using it to like finish people off or just to one-shot them already. So it's kind of like an extra one-shot if you weren't able to one-shot them with your combo. Like for instance, if you're playing Annie, for instance, if you're using your like ult bear combo, then maybe its killing time can be pretty good for that. But if you aren't finishing them off already, then maybe its killing time won't finish them off as well, as it does deal physical damage, which can be blocked by like tanks and stuff like that. This one's going to have to go in the not fully tested one for me as well. I do think that it is strong but niche, honestly, but a lot of times I just haven't really been impressed by it, so I'm not confident enough to put it up there. Definitely not something I'm going to give my stamp of approval to, pretty much is what I'm saying. It could be really good on Zed, actually, if you are able to get it. I don't know if they will offer it to you, but that could be really interesting. As I can imagine, there are very few champions that would be able to survive that combo, but I mean, if they have Zhonya's, then they can just completely ignore this as well. I will say, though, that having an augment that really relies on you using your ultimate super duper well kind of can also stress you out, because you will have that pressure that if you don't use your ultimate really effectively, then you're just down both your ult and your augment, which can really cause you to lose many fights. Okay, we finally reached the last Keystone augment, which is Keystone Conjurer, which gives you Arcane Comment and Summon Airy. This augment I'm going to be putting right above Dark Harvest and First Strike, as it is more reliable to actually proc. Again, I know they've tweaked the numbers on these slightly to try to make them better, but I just think the cooldowns on them are too long for them to actually be that effective. And if they overbuff them, then they'll be too OP, because Summon Airy could just like constantly proc, same with Comet. So it's definitely a slippery slope, kind of just weird augments for them to try and make work. I think they should just keep them at a weaker state, but make them silver augments so that they are takeable and they are kind of decent. without being too strong, because when they're in the gold augment tier list, they're just not really comparable to any of the other gold augments. You never really want to take them. But if you do buff them too much, then they are going to be just a little bit too OP in my opinion. But if you do buff them too much, there's that risk that they are too OP, because some champions just synergize really too well with keystones that there is that risk where they become way too OP on certain champions compared to other champions. I'll quickly need to add something about its critical that I mentioned in my last video, which is the fact that this augment's really good for like a second or third augment, as if you already have an augment that relies on crit, then its critical can just enhance those a lot more, which I think is the idea a little bit behind this augment, because like let's say you have its tank it or leave it, then its critical becomes way more valuable. Now we have the augment lightning strikes, where you gain 2.5 bonus attack damage per 10% attack speed. And this one actually used to be 3 bonus attack damage per 10% attack speed, so it has been nerfed. And I think this augment is definitely a little bit OP, especially because of the fact that there is no attack speed cap. A bunch of items just give a bunch of attack speed in the game. This augment is a little bit weaker because they actually removed the like 20 or 30% extra attack speed ranged champions received just because of the arena stat adjustments, which is nice and definitely lowers the impact of lightning strikes. But it is definitely still a good augment just because of how much attack speed there is in the game. We're now playing Dungeons & Dragons because we have Magic Missile in League of Legends, where dealing damage to an enemy with an active ability within 700 units fires 3 missiles at them that each deal true damage equal to 0.7% of the target's maximum health, which increases up to 2.1% based on distance traveled. So if these missiles traveled a very far distance, you would be doing 2.1% true damage 3 different times, which would be a total of like 6.3% maximum health damage, which is pretty ridiculous, and this ability is on a 2-second cooldown timer, which is really strong. This augment is definitely in the game-breaking category. Similarly to Firebrand, just having % maximum health damage is really important, just because there are so many tanks running around with so much health. And there are a lot of champions that can use Magic Missile really well. I was playing Asol, for instance, and did a ton of damage with Magic Missile, as I believe his Q can consistently proc it, or even if it doesn't, then you can just constantly cast your Q to always get these Magic Missile procs. I believe this would work on like Heimerdinger turrets or Zyra turrets, as long as you are within 700 units, which is a decent range, so those champions are very good with this effect. The next augment we have is Marksmage, where your basic attacks deal bonus physical damage equal to 100% AP. And originally this augment confused me because I thought it was very similar to the augment Escapade, which converts 100% of your AP into bonus attack damage and increases your attack damage by 10%. But the way Escapade works is that it will actually take your AP and remove it and turn it into bonus attack damage. While Marksmage, you get to keep your AP and just use it to deal bonus damage on your auto attacks. Now, honestly, I've been spamming Jhin in Arena as I really want to try Escapade Jhin out, because that sounds really fun, building a bunch of AP and then converting that all into AD to try and like one-shot people with my auto attacks, see if that would end up working, but sadly I've not been able to hit it yet. But when I was playing Jhin, I did play with a Volley Bear who had Marksmage, and him converting his AP into bonus physical damage, which made him so powerful he was able to 2v1 pretty much the entire game. So Marksmage, I'm going to put in the game-breaking tier. If you're a champion that can use both AP and AD stats, this is very strong. Another champion I think this could be very powerful on is someone like Jax, who could build like Zhonya's and Hextech Gunblade, and that alone will already be 180 AP, and he gets to keep that AP to deal bonus damage on his abilities, and each one of his auto attacks will be dealing that extra 180 damage, which is just absolutely insane. I think the idea of this augment is for like a Veigar to run around and do like 1,000 damage on each one of his auto attacks, which is decent, but honestly his auto attack is going to be so slow because he won't have a lot of attack speed in his kit, where you would rather just use his abilities instead of auto attacking people. But even in that case, it could be quite powerful if you do get a ridiculous amount of AP. So this augment has really high potentials. Even in the early game though, just building an item like Hexa Gunblade that I talked about would end up giving each one of your auto attacks the potential to deal 150 extra damage, because you get that 100 AP and you get that 50 AD, so in theory your auto attacks are getting that 150 strength. Now the next augment we have is Minionmancer, where your pets deal 60% increased damage as well as gain 60% bonus health and size. And initially, I actually had this in the strong but not OP tier, but now that I'm thinking about it more, this one definitely can be game-breaking in the right situations. If you're playing a champion like Yorick, for instance, his ghouls do so much damage, and Minionmancer will just make that absolutely more annoying. I played on a champion like Ivern, where Daisy is honestly more of a champion than he is, and I built like on hit on Ivern, and the Daisy did absolutely so much damage with Minionmancer, which is an absolute nuisance with how big it was and how tanky it was. Annie would be really incredible with this augment, but there's some champions that just aren't that amazing with it. Like Zyra, for instance, her plants sure did a little bit more damage, but it just didn't feel that impactful. I played with a Malzahar that was able to buff his minions with Minionmancer, but they already have so low health that it didn't really do too much. So while Minionmancer is really good on certain specific champions, it won't feel as powerful on others. But on those champions that rely on summons and pets to deal damage, then Minionmancer is absolutely game-breaking, as doing 60% increased damage with them is just absolutely incredible. Thankfully, Yorick just can't always get Minionmancer, as I think that could easily take over the game. The first augment that will actually belong in the strong but not OP tier is Mythical. And honestly, this isn't too incredible, as a lot of the legendary items are very strong in Arena, which is something that I kind of forget. And when you build too many mythic items, you're not gaining the mythic passives on them. So there's definitely some champions that want to build multiple mythics, and then it is very powerful. But in a lot of cases, it actually isn't that incredible. Now that I'm thinking about it, this augment is kind of a bait, actually, as you have to spend a whole gold augment just for the right to build another mythic, while legendary items aren't that much weaker in comparison. But if you are a champion that can use multiple mythics super duper effectively, then of course Mythical is going to be a great choice for you. I just can't really think of too many off the top of my head. I think as champions I could build like IE as well as Navori Quickblades maybe. That could be a really powerful combo. Or if you could build like Duskblade and Eclipse, maybe that would be something that is quite strong. Or if you're like a tank that can build Radiant Virtue and Heartsteel, that'd be a very powerful combo where you can still get a bunch of health and you can heal your teammate when you are ulting and yourself. Then we have OK Boomerang, which automatically casts Service Boomerang Blade at a nearby enemy, dealing some damage, which scales with your AD as well as your AP, and it has a 7-second cooldown. This one is a really short cooldown, which is very nice. And honestly, I'm going to put it in the strong but not OP tier. I think this augment is quite good in the earlier stages of the game, because you're like kiting out the enemies and just doing this extra damage can be quite impactful. It can sometimes miss or fire at a bad time, which sucks. Last time this was out, it was able to proc items, which is very strong, like Leandry's Anguish. Or it can even proc some prismatic augments, like the Ezreal one, where when you deal damage from afar, then it casts the Ezreal ult out, which is just an absolutely amazing combo. I would put OK Boomerang higher, but in the later stages of the game, the damage really falls off, as it doesn't do any percent health damage, and people just get ridiculously tanky, where they can just kind of face tank this damage and not care about it at all. Now we have Oathsworn, which replaces your Flee with Callista's Fate's Call, which is kind of similar to the one that replaces Flee with Kindred Ult. But my biggest problem with this one is that if you are playing with a random, this would be a terrible augment to take, because having that synergy of using a good Callista ult is really hard. You could ult them and then completely catch them off guard, and then they might not use it well afterwards. A lot of times you want to use it to like save your ally who's being engaged on by multiple enemies, but in this one, like having a carry have that as their augment instead of just having an augment that does like extra damage or just has more impact isn't very incredible. You could try to use this augment to like throw in somebody one time, but that again isn't too amazing. You'd rather just have a better augment. Using it as a replacement as like cannon fodder, I guess, is kind of okay, but having to get rid of your Flee for it definitely does suck. If you're on comms with a teammate and have great synergy, then perhaps this augment could be absolutely nutty if you've come up with some great combos with it. But because fights in general just seem to be longer, there aren't really that many wombo combos I can think of that would just absolutely win a fight instantly. For those reasons, I'm going to put it in the not fully tested, seems bad tier, but at the bottom, as I think these other augments definitely have some more merit. I've never taken Oathsworn before because I've been playing a lot with randoms and I don't want to scare them. I've had a teammate consider taking this one, and I told him on comms, please don't do it because we're probably just going to mess up the combo. And I don't believe I've actually seen anybody take it yet, so definitely not an augment that you just want to take willy-nilly. This is definitely an augment that has the potential to have super duper high highs if you're really good at saving somebody at just the right time. But in Arena, those cases are kind of rare and few between. Oftentimes, you just want to go for more consistent plays if what you really care about is winning. But if you just want to have fun and do a little bit of trolling, then Oathsworn could definitely be super duper interesting. Now we have Outlaw's Grit returning, where when you cast an ability with a dash or a blink, you grant yourself 12 bonus armor and bonus magic resistance, stacking up to 5 times for a total of 60 bonus resistances. Now this augment used to be 15 bonus armor and bonus magic resistance for each of those dashes or blinks instead, for maximum potential of 75 bonus resistances, which is just absolutely incredible. I still think 60 is pretty strong. I'm going to be placing this in the strong but not OP tier. I think losing that 15 bonus resistances does kind of suck. I think it is a decent rune, especially in the early to mid game where fights are longer, because having that bonus resistance on champions that probably aren't going to be building a ton of these resistances is really incredible and can definitely help you in those scraps. I just think the problem is that there is still too much damage from like on-hit items where Outlaw's Grit really won't help you survive against them. Now we have another augment that I've never ever seen in game called Parasitic Relationship, where you heal for 15% of the damage dealt by your ally. And because I haven't really tested it too much, I'm going to put in the not fully tested, but it does sound kind of bad. If you think this effect sounds really, really amazing, then you can just build Knight's Vow, because in Arena you actually heal 50% of your ally's damage dealt, so it is exactly the same. And maybe if you've ever built Knight's Vow, like I have many times, you've never been like too impressed by the healing that it is giving you. Sure, it is less in League of Legends, but also because the enemies can easily build anti-heal if your healing is too much of a problem, then Parasitic Relationship just doesn't feel that incredible. Perseverance is returning, but with an insane buff. When I first rated it, it gave you 500 base health regeneration, which increased to 1000 while you were below 25% maximum health, but now they've increased it to 800% base health regeneration, which increases to 1600 while below 25% maximum health, which is pretty insane. When I rated it the first time, I talked about how this was a really good early game augment, but later in the game, it just kind of fell off as regeneration isn't all that impactful, as a lot of the damage you will be taking will be pretty quick, or you'll just be like kited to death where the regeneration won't really matter as much, and the existence of heal cut once again, just having the effectiveness of your rune. That being said, I think early game is a lot more important in this iteration of Arena, as there are just a lot of stacking effects like Heartsteel, for example. So if you can win more early rounds, then maybe you can get some higher highs with your stacking augments, or you can help your teammates scale if you have a very powerful early game augment. So for that reason, I'm going to put it in the good tier. It's nothing too special still, because in the late game, you still are taking way more damage. So having really powerful late game augments is still really important. But if you want to have a really big advantage in the early game, then Perseverance is a good choice. Another augment that's returning that is getting a ton of buffs is Phenomenal Evil. In the first iteration, what it did is that when you hit enemy champions with abilities, you gained 1 ability power and it had a 1 second cooldown. Nowadays, it gives you 2 ability power every time you hit a champion with an ability and has a 0.5 second cooldown per ability. And also, if this is your second augment, it gives you 40 ability power just immediately. Because in the past, they would offer you this second and it felt kind of bad to take because you hadn't been stacking it the entire game. Now, I believe that mages weren't that strong in the first iteration of Arena, and I don't think they're that strong in current Arena, but that being said, I think Phenomenal Evil is actually the best gold augment in the game. I recently played against a Huey with this augment, and he ended up having over like 1400 ability power because of Phenomenal Evil, which is pretty strong, don't you think? The fact that they double the amount of ability power you're gaining and it's on a 0.5 second cooldown means that they are pretty much quadrupling how many stacks everybody is getting. I can believe that this is probably going to be getting nerfed quite soon, but in its current form, it is very strong. Another weird thing about Phenomenal Evil is that champions with like burn effects, even if it's on their passive, just seem to constantly proc it, like Brand, Teemo, Lilia, champions like that. If you look at them, you can see that they have an insane amount of Phenomenal Evil stacks at the end of the game because their passive burn counts as an ability that constantly is proccing, and it's constantly going to be giving them ability power, which is just an absolutely annoying combo and something that's really depressing to see if you're playing against it, because there's not really much you can do to prevent them from getting these stacks. The next augment we have is Steal Your Heart, where once you have a Heartsteel that has over 400 bonus health, you gain a reward, which increases the bonus health you've gained from Colossal Consumption by 200%, and you gain bonus health regeneration equal to 10% of the bonus health. And honestly, this augment, I believe, is just absolutely nutty. And honestly, the reason for that is because Heartsteel is kind of a compounding effect where it scales based on how much health you have. So the more health you have, the more health you will be gaining. And because this augment just gives you a bunch of bonus health, that means that each one of your future Heartsteel procs is going to be giving you even more health. If you see any champion that has this augment, you can see just how many stacks they have on their Heartsteel and how much damage that item is going to begin to do to you, which is just absolutely incredible. I think Heartsteel is just one of the best items right now, especially because fights are just lasting longer and that the importance of tanks is way higher now that you can revive your teammate. We have back-to-back quests with Earth's Champion, where your quest is to score 10 champion takedowns, and upon completing your quest, you receive the Golden Spatula. Now, this augment taken first is really terrible, actually, because you'll be down a gold augment, so getting those takedowns is going to be really incredible. Oftentimes what happens is people take this first, and then they end up getting fourth, and they never end up getting that Golden Spatula. It's actually funny, if you're playing in the game, just observe how many people take this augment, and then you'll see that they never end up actually getting the Golden Spatula, and so for the entire game, they were just down an entire gold augment. That being said, I'm actually going to end up putting it in the strong but niche tier because you can take this augment if you're offered it second, because it will actually count takedowns you've gotten from previous rounds. So by then you might already have like 8 or like 6 takedowns, and if you're strong enough to get just a couple more, then you can receive that Golden Spatula. But at the same time, this Golden Spatula item, while it gives you incredible stats, it does give you this on fire effect, which does sound pretty cool that you're on fire. But the on fire effect, what it does, it gives you reduced cooldowns, but it actually makes you squishier, and I think that is going to remain in Arena. I'm not 100% sure about that. Now that I think about it, in the same Volibear game, he actually had the Golden Spatula, but I didn't think he was on fire, so maybe they don't actually have that implemented in the game. I'm not 100% sure about that, but I don't think it was really the Golden Spatula that was making him be absolutely incredible. I think it was more the fact that Golden Spatula gave him AP, which let him do a bunch of damage with his Marksmage, which made the Golden Spatula a great item for him. But for a lot of other champions, the item itself actually won't be that incredible, as they can't use every single stat that effectively, as that's what the item does. This augment could definitely belong in the almost useless or useless tier if your teammate is taking it and you know that you're not going to be able to get those takedowns in time because you are so much weaker being down an augment. But if you are able to complete the quest and you are playing a champion that can use the item effectively, then it definitely is strong, which is why it belongs in this category. Next up, we have an augment, Rabble Rousing, which has changed a bit. And what it does is when you cast an ability, it heals you for 5 to 90 based on level, plus 1% of your maximum health. And what it used to do is, when you casted an ability, it would just heal you for plus 2% maximum health, which was way better. This augment is good on tanks, but it's even better on champions that have a ton of spam ability, like Cassiopeia, for instance. If she's constantly spamming E's, then she'll be constantly gaining plus 1% maximum health back, which is pretty good. There's not a lot of tanks out there that have like super duper low cooldown abilities, so Rabble Rousing doesn't feel that amazing. But if you have a ton of health, just being able to use one ability to gain 1% maximum health back, and you have like 4 abilities in theory, that is pretty good. I can imagine that this would be actually really strong on a tank Udyr, for example. If he's able to build like Heartsteel and stack a bunch of health, then Rabble Rousing could be pretty good. But you're still going to lose to a lot of the on-hit champions who are just going to be able to shred through all of that health. I'm going to be putting it in the good tier because it definitely is good, but it definitely doesn't feel that strong as there are just a lot of other better augments out there. Now we have the Augment Recursion, which grants you 60 ability haste. And initially, I really liked this augment. I thought it was really, really strong. But now with the existence of Bread and Butter, Bread and Jam, and Bread and Cheese giving you 150 ability haste on just one ability being a lot better, as it just gives you way more ability haste, and the potential to have it on one ability is just really, really good if it's on one of your more important abilities. That being said, I still definitely think it is strong, but definitely not as OP as any of the other augments. Gaining 60 ability haste is nice, it lets you just cast more often, so definitely a big fan of it, but I don't think it is that ridiculous. Speaking of casting your abilities more often, we have Restart, where your basic ability cooldowns are refreshed every 10 seconds. And again, this is an augment that I've not fully tested, and I haven't seen too many people take it. Yet, I'm still pretty confident in putting it in the useless tier. I've been offered this augment so many times, But the problem is with this augment is you kind of have to have like an inner clock in your head where you want to spam all of your abilities right before you get the restart effect so that you can immediately use them all again. It'll just kind of end up you playing in like a really weird way that you're not going to get used to unless you're able to get restart more often. I believe this augment would be absolutely OP if there was a champion that already had a similar mechanic that you were used to, because you're not going to be able to get used to it that quickly or not be able to practice it. I just don't think it is that incredible. There might be some champions that have like a ridiculously long cooldown on one of their basic abilities, but usually those abilities are like more utility based, like Ashe E for instance. Sure, it would be cool to have it up every 10 seconds, but like at the same time, who really cares about that? It's an interesting concept for an augment, but there's a reason why I've pretty much never seen anybody ever take it, as you just would rather have like 60 consistent ability cooldown, or just any augment that you can always rely on without having to play like a little mini game with yourself. Next up we have Restless Restoration, which used to be 0.5 to 1.5 healing for every 10 units traveled base, but now it is 0.2 to 1.2 based on level plus 0.02% maximum health. And it used to be plus 0.025% maximum health. I'll be honest, I've almost never taken this augment. I'm not a huge fan of the idea of like running around to try and just outlast your opponents. I like the idea of fighting them, trying to win in that way, instead of like having a mechanic where you run away and then you win. That's not really for me in Arena. Arena for me is fighting and seeing who has the better mechanics, the better skills, the better like strategy and the little fights. So I'm really not a big fan of Restless Restoration. I haven't seen too many people take it. I don't think I've ever taken it myself. That all being said, I do think it has the potential to be very strong, especially if they felt the need to nerf it. But I do think it is niche. It does kind of rely on you playing on a strategy, maybe where you're focused more on the zone winning the fights for you, so that could definitely be good. If that's a strategy you really enjoy, then Restless Restoration could potentially be very good for you. But if you are fighting and the enemies are like able to CC you or trap you, then Restless Restoration won't be able to really benefit you, as you will not be moving that much. Now we have the augment that last year I placed in first place, which is Scopier Weapons. But this year I'm going to end up placing it in second place, as I do think Phenomenal Evil received enough buffs where that one is just more OP. Scoped Weapons is just so good because on-hit champions are so powerful where they can just absolutely mow you down with how much item damage there is. So them being able to pump out that damage for more safety and do it more reliable is just very powerful, especially for a gold augment, as the gold augments aren't that ridiculous, so you're not really missing out on too much more. Just being able to do your damage more reliably feels really amazing, which is why Scoped Weapons is so good. It's even more incredible in the matchups where one person has scoped weapons and the other person does not, because you'll be able to get like a couple of hits in before they're able to ever hit you, which does really matter a lot. Next up we have Searing Dawn, which I absolutely trashed for being super duper weak, and I was right, as they have buffed it a fair amount, where it used to be 24 to 160 bonus magic damage, but now it is 40 to 200. Now this is going to be best on champions with like a burn effect. I think like Singed could maybe use Searing Dawn pretty effectively actually, if you're like playing with somebody with a lot of attack speed at the same time, because I believe Singed Poison will keep proccing the Searing Dawn, and then your ally can pretty much constantly proc it with their auto attacks. But at the same time, it's kind of a weird, wonky combination and nothing too incredible. I'm going to be putting this augment in the strong but niche tier. If you have a champion that can constantly mark enemies so that your ally can do this extra damage, then sure, it is okay. But I don't think there are too many combos where they can use this quite effectively. And if you're not constantly proccing this extra damage, it's not going to really show up that often on the damage chart. Also, again, in the late game, it's really not going to do that much at all, because there is just so much health in the game, where if you're not doing percent health damage, this Searing Dawn damage will not really matter. Shrink Ray is returning, where your basic attacks will reduce the target's damage dealt by 50% for 3 seconds, refreshing with each hit. And in the first tier list, I had this really high, especially when like one-shotting people was way more common, so being able to reduce their damage was very important. But nowadays, it seems like fights are more extended, so being able to reduce their damage by 50% is still a strong effect, but definitely not OP, as at some point there will be just so much damage that they'll be able to ignore the fact that they're doing 15% less and still blow you up. Now we have another new augment, which I actually really like in Skills Sniper, where hitting an enemy with a basic ability at over 700 units reduces the cooldown of that ability to 0.5 seconds. This is really fun on something like a Varus Q, where you can constantly just be using it. But the problem is the enemies will just run up in your face and then you're just down an entire gold augment because they will not be at this 700 range, which just absolutely sucks. This one again belongs in the strong but niche tier. If you are playing against people who want to be far away like your Zyras and Teemos, then Skill Sniper is really good because you'll be forcing them towards you, and then hopefully you have enough peel for yourself where you can keep them at this 700 unit range, and then they'll be having to play like a little dodge minigame, which is just absolutely incredible. But unless you're in one of those super duper specific scenarios, oftentimes you'll just end up not having an augment, like I said, because they won't be at this 700 unit range and instead will be in your face. And also 700 unit range is really quite far away. Now we have Soul Siphon, where your critical strikes benefit from 20% lifesteal, and it used to be 30% lifesteal, so it has been nerfed. And additionally, you gain 20% critical strike chance. When it was 30% lifesteal, I thought this augment was really powerful, and I still think it is strong, but definitely not OP. This is a good augment if you have a lot of critical strike chance already, because you probably won't have too much Omnivav. You might have some from Bloodthirster, but not from your other items. And just getting that extra bit of lifesteal can be really impactful, especially if you're able to lifesteal tank against certain people. But again, the existence of anti-heal can reduce the effectiveness of this augment, and if you get like CC'd or you take too much damage, then having lifesteal won't really matter. Now we have the Augment Brutalizer, which is pretty simple and pretty boring, and it gives you 25 bonus attack damage, 10 ability haste, and 10 lethality. It's definitely a good augment. It's alright. It's nothing too special. I'm never too excited to take it. If an enemy takes it, I'm never really that scared. It just feels really alright. It's pretty much just having like an extra item that's pretty weak, but it doesn't take up an inventory slot. Now we have Thread the Needle, which grants you 25% armor penetration and magic penetration. And this item is really good on any champion that has hybrid damage like Kaisa or like Kale, and having this armor pen and magic pen is really impactful. I'm not actually sure how it works with an item like Rageblade. Does it stack on top of it? In that case, you'll be ignoring a ton of their armor and magic resistance and pretty much just like almost doing like true damage to them. Not really, that's an exaggeration, but you will be doing a lot of damage to them. I think this augment is definitely strong, but not OP. It's really good against tanks, but not as good against squishier targets. And I think there are just better augments out there for people who want to do damage. But if you do feel like you need some pen, then this is a great augment for you. It's also nice that this is one of those augments that just always is effective, which not all of the augments are. Speaking of Rageblade, we have the augment Twice Thrice, where your basic attacks grant a stack up to 2 times, and at 2 stacks, your next basic attack consumes all stacks to apply on a hit effects, again at 150% effectiveness, which is pretty much the Rageblade passive. And like I say, on-hits are absolutely ridiculous in the game. The items just have insane on-hit effects, and if being able to proc them more often, I think it's just absolutely incredible. If this works on top of your Rageblade, that means you'll be doing on-hits just like so much. And if you've ever died to a champion that has a lot of on-hits, just look at the item damage at the damage recap and you can see just how ridiculous it is. So any augment that buffs those on-hit damage effects is really good. We have another augment that replaces Flee, but this time with Vanish, and Vanish grants you invisibility for 4 seconds, and attacking or casting abilities ends the stealth immediately. Vanish is honestly a pretty cool augment because you can do some outplays with it, and I think this was a lot better in previous Arena where like one-shotting people was a much more important mechanic, or like a much more important strategy. But now oftentimes you don't really see these assassins or mages that can do that much damage be as effective, especially because a lot of them have been pretty heavily nerfed, and most of the damage is going to be coming from like on-hit champions. You can maybe get like the surprise on them if you vanish and then just show up and absolutely shred them. So there is definitely a lot of potential here if you are good with this augment. Initially I actually had it in the almost useless tier, but thought of a champion with like a bunch of on-hit vanishing and then just showing up and absolutely one-shotting you with all of their on-hit is actually very terrifying. So in that case, I'm going to be putting it in the strong but niche tier, because if you are able to do a very cool play like that, then you can definitely win the fight. But that's also more of like a late game dream instead of like an early game thing, because in the late game you would have enough damage to maybe one-shot them, but in the early game you probably won't, as you won't have enough items, and you'll just be down kind of a gold augment, and you'll also be down the Flee summoner spell, which is very powerful. Similarly to Dive Bomber, we have Vengence, which is an augment that gets better once your teammate is dead. And what this does is you gain 30% increased damage and 30% Omnivamp if you are the only one alive. This augment is now a lot worse with the revive mechanic because the game you actually want to bring back your teammate. I'm going to be putting this in the almost useless tier. Once again, I think any augment that is trying to play around one of your teammates dying isn't very good. The dream of being able to then 2v1 a fight doesn't really happen that often. Usually the champions that think Vengence is a good idea to be taken on are like the tank champions, but in the 2v1 scenario, that 30% increased damage just isn't enough for them to actually win, nor is the Omnivamp. If you take it like on a squishier champion, it's just going to focus you because they can see that you have Vengence, and then it won't actually do anything for you at all. The augment literally does nothing until your teammate is dead, while all the other augments are doing something, so there is a good chance you're just going to lose the fight because people actually have augments that do something the entire time. Now we have the augment Willing Sacrifice, which has been nerfed. It used to be that when your ally drops below 30% of their maximum health, you reduce your current health by 30% to grant them a shield equal to that same amount for a duration, but now the numbers are focused around 25%, and this augment is still very good. I'd put it in the strong but not OP tier. When the meta, again, was more about one-shotting people, Willing Sacrifice was very, very powerful because being able to play a tank and then giving your teammate who is squishy a huge shield was very, very impactful. It still is very strong, but now being able to revive them as well as a mechanic, a bit less important, but it is still a very strong augment. The final augment we have is with Haste, and what this does is it grants you bonus movement speed equal to 150% ability haste. Now, I was wondering why I felt like this augment was a bit weaker in this iteration, and I just realized that it used to be 200% of your ability haste would be converted into bonus movement speed, which was absolutely nutty. It's still a good augment, but it doesn't really do extra damage, and mages being able to kite isn't as important as AD champions being able to kite because they have to wait for the cooldowns on their spells. This could potentially be really good on Cassiopeia, as she is a mage that really wants to kite a lot. But in most cases, I'm only going to put this in the good tier. This could be really good on champions that build AP that just want to run at you, maybe like a Volibear or an Udyr or like an Annie. That could actually be really scary now that I think about it. So there's definitely some potential with the augment with haste, but I think a lot of gold augments in general are just better as they do damage or they help you survive, which movement speed in theory can help you do, but it's not as consistent. Well, that completes my gold augment tier list. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you have anything to comment on it, please leave it down below. After all, that's how I found out about the interaction with the augments that are based around Curse, which was really cool to see. So if you have any other new interactions, or if you disagree with anything I say because there's something I am missing, then I definitely want to hear it, as there is just so much right now in Arena to explore, and it's so hard to do. If you did enjoy this video, I hope you leave it a like and maybe consider subscribing because I will be covering the prismatic augments as soon as I can. Again, I want to thank you guys so much for watching, and I want to wish you good luck on your Arena games.